The Consciously Curious Show is the place to inspire or satisfy your curiosity. Welcome back to the Consciously Curious Show, where I am talking to Dr. Verdi Lethermon. Welcome back.
Thank you, ma'am.
And when we left, we were talking about the fact that you have 3 books, and we talked a little bit about the adult book, but I'm really fascinated with how you present this concept to children, because really what you're doing is helping children understand that they can have a relationship with God as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think our children, without sounding too overly dramatic, are an endangered species these days. There's so many challenges that our children face that most of us didn't face to the same degree when we were growing up. And so I want children to have an idea that the God of the universe wants to intimately interact with them, even though they're still very small babes. And I start by guiding them to the idea of just prayer and what kinds of things they could pray about. And the book talks about a divorced situation. It talks about a sick grandparent. It talks about bullying. It talks about the frightening things that children encounter on a routine basis, and the ideas are general enough that they can be used to give examples of other challenging situations that our children face. So I start with introducing the notion of prayer, and then I give them some ideas of what God might say to them in those situations, so they have a sense that He cares, He loves them, He wants to guide them, and He wants to comfort them. So it's a twofold process: pray and then hear. And again, that expectation is there, that God will speak to the tiniest of babes, and all they have to do is reach out and listen. And I give them some guidelines about quieting the noise in their lives, just like we as adults have to do.
Right. And I think that children, all children really, are more aware of their connection and maybe God than adults are. And then as they get older and they become more and more a part of the real world, then they tend to lose that connection. So I think it's important to start them early. And of course their parents have to, I think, encourage that, right?
Sure.
So I think a lot of adults can start with the children's book too.
And that's a comment that I've received oftentimes, that the adults who read or guide the children through the book will learn with the children, because it is important. And that's kind of a secondary reward for the adults taking the books to the children. So I love it.
And I believe one of the most important things about your message and your books is that it brings people to the awareness that we can have a personal relationship and a personal connection with God.
Absolutely. And that is a message that has not been taken to the heart of the world as much as it could be, and as much as I believe it should have been. And I think now is the time to, and that's the focus of my ministry, is to take that message beyond any barriers, racial barriers or socioeconomic barriers or even language barriers. My children's book has been translated into Spanish, and that the Spanish version will be out soon as well. So it's just a ministry message that crosses any boundary that you can imagine, and I'm very concerned that that message be told from the rooftops to the valleys across the world.
Now, I'm not going to put these words in your mouth, but these are my words, and one of the reasons I love what you're doing is I think that we have, as a society, sort of lost that personal connection, lost even the understanding that we can have that. And I do believe that that's important, and I think that the way that you present these concepts are very gentle. They're very, and yet very profound. So I think that's so important. I want to thank you for doing this.
Yes.
And the next thing that you've done is you've taken that to the adolescents, which is an interesting group to communicate with on any level, right? So good for
sure.
you for tackling that.
Yes.
But what's the difference in the adolescent approach from the children's or the adults?
Right. Well, with adolescents, I have sought to keep it humorous and to keep it light. I don't want to beat them up. I don't want to, criticize them for who they are. For example, one of the chapters in the adolescent book says marching to a different drum beat is okay. And so many parents need to understand that just because Johnny or Sally or Jorge doesn't march to the drum beat that we march to, there's nothing wrong with that. And so I want to encourage them. But I also want to encourage them that, yes, another chapter title, yes, I'm talking to you. Because a lot of times they won't believe that God is speaking to them. And so I want their attention drawn to the fact that God has that sense of humor that you mentioned earlier, and that he is and wants to speak directly to teenagers. So that book is written for teenagers and the adults who love them, because they can't do it on their own. They need the guidance of adults that they may not always want. So I use more humor, and that book is also being co-authored by my adolescent son.
Perfect.
So he's bringing the adolescent perspective rawly to this book. And so I think between the two of us, we will be able to communicate to the adolescent audience in a way that they will get it for themselves. And one of my favorite quotes, if I can just throw this in,
Absolutely.
is that from a book that was written several years ago, the quote is that God has an intimate relationship with each of us as though no one else exists. And I believe that, and I accept that, and I treasure that.
And you have that,
and
because
I
you
have
believe
that.
and accept that.
I have that, and I treasure that, and that's the message that I want the children, the teens, and the adults to hear loud and clear.
Okay. And so you're taking this message into churches,
Yes.
and is that primarily where you're focusing?
Not really, because any audience that would want that message, because the message beyond the fact that God wants to talk to us personally is a message of empowerment. It's a message of hope. It's a message of overcoming challenges. So it's not just a message that's relegated to a church audience. And so, no, the boundaries of who I take this message to just depends on who hears it and who is touched by the message in a way that says that applies to me or that can apply to me. So no, not at all is it limited to churches.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Okay.
How do you know the difference when it's God speaking to you, or if it's just your mind doing chatter stuff?
And that, to me, that's so easy, because one of the gauges that I use is, number one, is it something that I'm smart enough to say to myself? And so often what God says to me, I don't have that wealth of knowledge to be able to formulate it and communicate it to me that way.
Right.
And so it's beyond my capabilities. Oftentimes I don't want to hear it. And I have to admit that. There are things that God says to me that I didn't want to hear that, but I know that that is coming from him. And then thirdly, I've communicated with God so much that I know his voice. And when I have a relationship with another human being, I'm accustomed to their voice. Like I've talked with you now several times. Right. I know Peggy Sue's voice when I hear it. If you didn't identify yourself, I know, oh, that's Peggy Sue. Or my children know my voice, or I know my children's voice. So I have talked with God so much and so often that I know what his voice sounds like. And then, as I told you earlier, he says what he says in the Bible. He doesn't contradict that. He doesn't make something up. It is his word that I also know well. So I recognize it when I hear it, even if I don't quite know how it fits in the situation that I'm currently facing.
Okay. So I'm going to take it from what you're saying, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm getting from this is, okay, boys and girls, God didn't die at the end of the New Testament. He's alive. He's in our lives, and
most definitely.
And a real part of who we are.
Oh, most definitely. Oh, most definitely. The relationship is so alive because he is alive and because he desires relationship with us. He created us for relationship with him. He didn't need us to do anything. He just wanted to have a relationship with us. And I mean, if we don't get that, and if no one's taught us that, that is the greatest, I don't know what the word is, but it's horrible that people don't know that for themselves. And so that's my mission. I want people to know that the God of the universe loves us, desires us, and wants to have an intimate relationship with us.
And does have an intimate relationship with us. It's just whether we have one with him or not.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. And that's a funny story, because he asked me one time, how would you feel if your children talked to you as infrequently as you talk to me?
Ooh, I like
Yes,
that.
and that stung. And I wouldn't have said that to myself. So but that was funny, because he made a point using a little humor, but I got the message. Come talk to me, Verdi.
And that is a perfect message right there. I think that kind of sums up everything that you're doing. Is if you want a relationship, you've got to participate.
Yes, most definitely. And when you do, he is faithful to keep it going. So.
Perfect. But it takes a little practice for a lot of people,
Yes,
right?
it does, because I don't get to know you in 5 minutes.
Right.
And so it takes time that we invest to get to know him, and to have that relationship become more comfortable and one that is more intimate. It does take time.
And now we're on the phone every day. You know?
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
we're chatting every day.
Exactly, man, and I love it. I just love it.
Okay. So, what do you see as the next step for you and your ministry? What would you like? Where would you like to take this? Your perfect arena.
My perfect arena would be that that I would just have other people take the message that I have started, and not started alone, but that I have given some impetus to, and that they take the message to arenas that I will never reach, and that out of them being discipled sorta by the things that I've taught, that the word just spreads like an epidemic. But it's a real positive, healthy, healing epidemic, and God just smiles and says, way to go, children.
Going to keep God busy, right?
Yes.
Keep God busy. Have an intimate
Yes,
relationship.
absolutely.
I like that.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Yes.
Okay, and so you do speak to
do.
groups.
I do.
And what does that look like? I mean, when you speak to groups, are you giving them pretty much the information that we're talking about right now? Do you have exercises that they do? Do you have practice?
All of the above.
Okay.
Because depends on what the nature of the event is, then I tailor what I say to fit their need. But whenever I have a tiny window, I'm going to include the message that God is personally involved in our lives to the degree that we allow him to be. And I'm going to intertwine that in almost anything that I say, because that is the truth that I live and that I have experience him with. So, but I always tailor what I say to what the event is and what the audience is looking for.
Okay. And your books do give some guidelines about how to make this happen.
Yes.
So
yes.
if it's sort of a how-to,
Yes.
as well as examples of your experience.
Exactly. And one of the things that I say with the adults and the children and the adolescents is that we have to still ourselves and be quiet. God is not going to shout. He is the King, the Lord of the universe, the Creator. He's not going to shout to get our attention. In the children's book, I have a picture of a little boy with the phone and the PSP and the something else, and he's distracted. You can't hear God when you're too busy and too noisy. So we have to be quiet.
Well, I love that. I think we in general need to slow down. Dr. Verdi, I so appreciate you being with me. This has been delightful.
Thank you.
I know that you are going to spread that message. Who knows how far you'll take this.
Exactly.
But good for you.
Thank you.
All right.
I love it.
And thank you for joining us today. I'm Peggy Sue Skipper, and we'll see you next time. Dr. Verdi's book for adults is When God Speaks, People Who Hear Are Healed. And her children's book, If God Wanted to Talk to You, Would You Listen? If you'd like more information on Dr. Verdi's books or her practice, visit her website at verdilethermon.com. Or you can contact Dr. Verdi by phone at 281-444-4336 or by email drverdi@verdilethermon.com.